police detained Brandon, he voluntarily went to be evaluated by the hospital. It wasn't considered involuntary, although arguably he qualified to be held without consent if he hadn't agreed, but that was never taken into consideration. Technically, he had never been found to be mentally defective, and that is all that mattered with regard to his firearms. To be found mentally defective by adjudication means that he would have to have been found to be mentally defective by a court of law. Unfortunately, the gun used in the attack is the same gun that was taken from him and then returned to him 29 days later.
In November 2016, Mr. walked into the Anchorage FBI office to report that his mind was being controlled by a U.S. intelligence agency. During the interview, Mr. appeared agitated, incoherent, and made disjointed statements. Although he stated he did not wish to harm anyone, as a result of his erratic behavior, our agents contacted local authorities who took custody of Mr. and transported him to the local medical facility for evaluation. The FBI closed its assessment of Mr. Santiago after conducting database reviews and interagency checks. There have been reports Mr. turned himself in. This is not true. He was a walk-in complaint. This is something that happens at FBI offices around the country every day. There have been concerns raised about why Mr. Santiago was not placed on a no-fly list. I want to be clear. During our initial investigation, we found no ties to terrorism.
Brandon was living with his girlfriend and small child in Fairview, Alaska. Because Brandon wasn't allowed to have contact with his girlfriend, he was staying in a nearby hotel. Before he was arrested for the assault on his girlfriend, the young family lived in a small home where a Puerto Rican flag proudly hung in the window. The small square home sat behind a series of townhomes, and a small park with a basketball court and a swing set were located across the street. Later, his neighbors would say that something always just seemed a little off with him. He seemed to always be up at night, and he and his girlfriend kept to themselves. Brandon was employed at a security company called Signal 88 Security, where he worked as a security guard. Brandon was employed at a security company called Signal 88 Security, where he worked as a guard. Part of his job was to patrol local businesses and shops. On November 15th, he was fired from that position due to mental health issues. Yet, once again, police or family were never notified of his erratic behavior. Brandon's brother was interviewed after the attack, and he stated his frustrations with the FBI and felt that the FBI failed Brandon. He said Brandon went to the FBI looking for help, and he didn't get the help that he needed. Although he was never actually diagnosed with PTSD, Brandon's brother feels that he suffered from such. Brandon never spoke about his time in Iraq and seemed to keep his experiences bottled up.
Here now, watch what this suspected killer's brother told CNN today. Take a listen.
I want to clarify this for the Puerto Rican people and for all the people in the world, that the federal government already knew his reaction. They already knew the thoughts that he was having and how they weren't good. He himself went after them to ask for help, and they did nothing. They had him hospitalized for 4 days, and then they let him go. How are you going to let someone leave a psychological center after 4 days when he is saying that he's hearing voices, that the CIA is telling him to join certain groups? This was in November. He was a peaceful person, amicable. Everyone who knew him would say the same thing, that he was an amicable person. He would always help me. He would always do favors for people. Various people have supported me, telling me that they know him and that they didn't treat him in enough time. These are people who know they didn't treat him, who know what veterans suffer from when they come back from the war. There are several of them who get help, and several others who, well, don't get the same follow-up. Not everyone has the same reaction when they return from war. It's too early to know our family's plans. We haven't been able to speak to him. The authorities have him. A government agency has come here to give us the notice that we can't speak to him. I'd like to talk to him. It's the first thing I want to do, talk to him to see how he is doing. I don't know when the trial will be. I was told soon, maybe. They are saying, well, some channels are saying that he was Muslim. What happened was, when he went to Iraq, he bought a scarf. He bought it as a souvenir, and he took the photo with it, as a memory of what he bought in Iraq. That is it. He didn't belong to any radical group. We were born under the Christian faith.
After the attack, the hotel that Brandon was staying at in Alaska was evacuated and searched the same day as the shooting. They also seized the hotel's dumpster to search for any additional evidence. The day after the shooting, Brandon was charged federally for various charges, including performing an act of violence at an international airport, using and carrying a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence, and causing death of a person through the use of a firearm. On January 26th, Brandon was indicted on 22 federal charges stemming from the airport shooting. During an arraignment hearing on January 30th, 2017, Brandon pled not guilty to all of the charges. Because he could not afford an attorney, one was appointed to him. His attorneys immediately knew something was wrong with their client and sought to have him properly evaluated and diagnosed. They didn't think he was competent to stand trial. And they were right. While he was in jail, he was finally properly diagnosed with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. At first, he refused to take the psychotropic medication that would restore him to a sound mind. Later, after he finally began taking the medication, his mental condition greatly improved and he was found competent. He now could stand trial. On May 23, 2018, Brandon pled guilty to all charges in order to avoid the death penalty, which was a plea that was agreed on by both defense and the prosecutor. On August 17, 2018, he was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences, plus 120 years. Brandon will never set foot as a free man again. On September 12, 2018, Brandon was transferred from FCD Miami to FTC Oklahoma City. On September 12, 2018, Brandon was transferred from FCD Miami to FTC Oklahoma City. He was transferred once again on September 20th, 2018 to USP Allenwood, where he continues to reside to this day. Because he pled guilty, a very long and emotional trial was avoided, as well as years of appeals. As part of the plea agreement, Brandon gave up his right to appeal as part of his sentence. Many of the victims were glad that the case didn't go to trial. Some of them also didn't believe in the death penalty. They didn't want a young man who was obviously mentally ill to be sentenced to death. According to his defense team and mental health expert, Brandon has now expressed remorse for his crimes. A medication change has also helped stabilize his condition, and he no longer hears voices or experiences delusions telling him to harm others. Today, Brandon spends time in prison listening to NPR and reading. He also talks to his mom once every 2 weeks, a luxury some of his victims will never have the chance to do again. The shooting at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood Airport opened up an issue about flying on a plane with a firearm. According to the TSA website, bringing a gun on a plane is completely legal as long as you follow specific rules. The gun must be in a case that locks, and it must be part of your checked baggage. You have to check the gun and gun case separately from your other checked baggage. You are not allowed to bring the gun on a plane as a carry-on item, and if you bring ammunition, you must also declare the ammunition.
Somewhere tonight, someone is checking a firearm for a flight, and it is perfectly legal. While the TSA confiscates hundreds of weapons at checkpoints in carry-ons, a gun owner who follows the rules can travel with a weapon as checked baggage, which apparently did.
And the right way is you take your firearm and you pack it at home.
TSA requires that the weapon is unloaded. It has to be packed in a hard case, plastic, wood, or metal that must be locked.
And then when you go to check in for your flight, you've got to check in at the counter and declare that you have the firearm.
But it's not just the unloaded weapon that's allowed in that case. Ammunition magazines and a small amount of small arms ammunition, which is boxed, can also be carried.
The ticket counters and the baggage claim areas are very lightly secured with almost no security at all.
I think if you look at the baggage area, you can see just how vulnerable that area is. The airports were built in the days before terrorism, and so as we've noted, it's quite easy to drive right up to that baggage claim and execute an attack.
Brandon followed all the correct procedures to take a gun on a plane, and no one ever questioned why Brandon would have checked just a gun and no other luggage while traveling on a one-way ticket. It seems unusual that a person would go on such a long flight from Alaska to Florida with absolutely no luggage whatsoever. The security of the baggage claim area as well as the screening when checking a gun needs to be reviewed and revised by our lawmakers. While we stress the importance of if you see something, say something, it's also important to be aware of your surroundings and be alert at all times of anything that could be out of place or out of the ordinary. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving. A huge thank you to Darren Curtis, who composed some of the music used in this episode. Check him out at darrencurtismusic.com. DARRENCURTIS music.com.
Active shooter. Reports of an active shooter.
Active shooter mass casualty incidents.
Make sure to check us out on social media. We have a discussion group on Facebook. Just search for Active Shooter, the podcast discussion group. You can also find us on Instagram at Active the Podcast and Twitter at Podcast Active. For just $1 a month, you can get access to ad-free episodes, early release episodes when available, and a shout-out on the show. Just go to patreon.com/Active the Podcast. Thank you, and be safe.
A fascination with the unknown has led me to research countless unsolved murders and missing persons cases. These victims are often forgotten in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Nevertheless, they need their cases recognized in order to keep investigators working on it. These victims also deserve justice and peace in the afterlife. Here I will share them all with you, giving both the facts and the theories every Wednesday at 3:30 a.m. Check out The Great Unsolved for more information.